Every child deserves to feel safe in their own neighborhood. But for 11-year-old Maya Johnson, that safety shattered the moment she followed her dog into the abandoned house at the end of Maple Street. In present-day Baltimore, Maya notices her golden retriever Max staring at the same crumbling house every single day during their walks. His behavior becomes so obsessive that Maya's curiosity gets the better of her. When she finally sneaks inside, she discovers a hidden room containing old photographs, newspaper clippings, and evidence of a crime that was never solved. But here's what makes this discovery truly shocking. The evidence connects directly to her own family's past. What secret was buried in that house that someone desperately wanted to keep hidden? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Johnson household on Maple Street had always been a place where 3 generations of women found strength in each other's presence. Maya lived with her mother, Sarah, a nurse at Johns Hopkins, who worked long shifts but never missed a bedtime story, and her grandmother, Nana, whose real name was Dorothy, but whom everyone had called Nana for so long that Maya sometimes forgot. She had another name at all. Their house sat 4th from the corner, a narrow row house with red brick that Sarah had painted white shutters on last spring. Maya loved the way the morning light caught those shutters and made them glow like fresh snow. The small front garden where Nana grew tomatoes and marigolds every summer was Maya's favorite place to sit with Max when the weather was nice. Max had been Maya's constant companion for 3 years now, ever since Sarah brought him home as a rescue puppy with golden fur that reminded Maya of the honey Nana drizzled on her biscuits. He was patient and gentle, the kind of dog who let Maya dress him up in old scarves and never complained when she practiced braiding his fur. Max was smart too, smarter than most people gave him credit for. He knew when Maya felt sad and would rest his head on her lap without being asked. He knew when storms were coming hours before the weather reports mentioned them. And lately, he seemed to know something about the abandoned house that Maya couldn't understand. The house in question stood at the very end of their street, where Maple Street curved slightly before connecting to the busier Franklin Avenue. It was a larger house than the others, with a peaked roof and a wraparound porch that had probably been beautiful once upon a time. Now the paint peeled in long strips like old wallpaper, and several of the porch boards sagged in ways that made Maya think of a tired old man's shoulders. The front yard was overgrown with weeds that reached almost to Maya's waist, and the windows were boarded up with plywood that had weathered to a dull gray color. Maya had walked past that house twice a day for years, once on her way to school and once on her way home, but she had never paid it much attention until Max started acting strange around it. The change in his behavior had been gradual at first. During their evening walks, he would slow down as they approached the house, his ears perked forward in that alert way that meant he was concentrating on something Maya couldn't see or hear. Then he started stopping completely, sitting down on the sidewalk and staring at the house with an intensity that made Maya uncomfortable. "What's wrong with you lately?" Maya had asked him one evening about 2 weeks ago, tugging gently on his leash. But Max refused to move, his brown eyes fixed on something Maya couldn't identify. She followed his gaze, scanning the empty windows and the sagging porch, but saw nothing that should capture a dog's attention so completely. The behavior had only gotten worse since then. Now Max pulled toward the house every time they walked past it, whining softly when Maya tried to lead him away. Yesterday, he had actually broken free from his leash and run straight to the house's front gate, pawing at the rusty chain that held it shut. Maya had to coax him away with the promise of extra treats, but even then, he kept looking back over his shoulder as they walked home. "That dog of yours is acting mighty peculiar," Mrs. Patterson had observed that morning. Mrs. Patterson lived 2 houses down from the Johnsons and had appointed herself the unofficial neighborhood watch coordinator. She spent most of her days sitting on her front porch with a cup of coffee and a pair of binoculars, keeping track of who came and went and when. Maya's mother said Mrs. Patterson meant well, but Maya sometimes found the elderly woman's attention a bit overwhelming. "He's just curious about something," Maya had replied, scratching behind Max's ears as he sat panting beside her on the front steps. "Curious about that old Morrison place from the looks of it," Mrs. Patterson said, shaking her head. "That house has been empty for near on 40 years now. Nothing there for a dog to be curious about, if you ask me." Maya perked up at this information. She had always assumed the house was abandoned because the owners couldn't afford to maintain it, but 40 years was longer than she had been alive. Longer than her mother had been alive, for that matter. "What happened to the Morrison family?" she asked. Mrs. Patterson's expression grew somber. "Oh, child, that's not a story for young ears. Tragedy. That's what happened. Some things are better left buried." But Maya's curiosity was already sparked. That evening, she asked Nana about the Morrison house while they prepared dinner together. Nana was teaching Maya how to make her famous cornbread, measuring out ingredients while Maya stirred the batter. "Nana, do you remember a family called Morrison who used to live in the big house at the end of our street?" Nana's hands stilled for just a moment, and Maya caught the slight tightening around her grandmother's eyes before she resumed measuring. "Cornmeal. Why do you ask, sweetheart?" "Mrs. Patterson mentioned them today. She said they lived there a long time ago." "Mrs. Patterson talks too much," Nana said quietly. "Always has. Some stories aren't meant for children to worry about." Maya frowned, stirring the batter with perhaps more vigor than necessary. She had always prided herself on being mature for her age. Her teachers frequently complimented her on her thoughtfulness and responsibility. Sarah often said Maya was an old soul, someone who understood things beyond her years. So why did all the adults in her life suddenly think she was too young to hear about their neighbors? "I'm not a little kid anymore, Nana," Maya said carefully. "I'll be 12 in 3 months. Nana smiled and touched Maya's cheek with floury fingers. "I know, baby girl. You're growing up so fast it sometimes takes my breath away. But some things, some sad things, they're heavy to carry. I don't want to put that weight on your shoulders." Maya wanted to argue, to insist that she could handle whatever sad story surrounded the Morrison house, but something in Nana's expression stopped her. There was a depth of sadness there that Maya had never noticed before, a kind of weariness that seemed to settle over her grandmother like a familiar coat. That night, after dinner and homework and her favorite television show, Maya sat at her bedroom window looking down at the Morrison house. From her second-floor vantage point, she could see over the overgrown hedge that surrounded the property. The house looked even more forlorn from above, its roof missing several shingles and its chimney leaning at an angle that couldn't possibly be safe. Max lay curled up on Maya's bed, but even from there he seemed aware of the house's presence. Every few minutes his ears would twitch and he would lift his head to look toward the window, as if he could sense something calling to him from that empty building. Maya had always been the kind of child who asked questions. In kindergarten, she had driven her teacher to distraction by wanting to know not just what letters made, which sounds, but why they made those sounds, and who had decided that was the way it should be. In 3rd grade, she had turned a simple book, Report on Charlotte's Web, into a research project about actual spider behavior and life cycles. Last year, she had convinced her science teacher to let her design an extra experiment, testing different methods of plant growth after she wondered whether talking to plants really made them grow better. Sarah always said Maya had inherited her investigative nature from Nana, who had worked as a legal secretary for 30 years before retiring. "Your grandmother never met a mystery she didn't want to solve," Sarah would say with fond exasperation. Whenever Maya's curiosity led her down particularly complex research paths. But now, faced with a mystery literally at the end of her own street, Maya found herself in the unusual position of being actively discouraged from investigating. The adults in her life, people who usually supported and encouraged her intellectual curiosity, suddenly wanted her to leave this particular puzzle alone. which of course only made Maya more determined to solve it. The next morning, Maya decided to take a different approach. Instead of asking the adults in her life about the Morrison family, she would do what she always did when she wanted to learn about something: research it herself. After school, instead of going straight home, Maya stopped by the public library on Franklin Avenue. The librarian, Mrs. Rodriguez, knew Maya well from all her previous research projects. "What's captured your interest this time?" she asked with a smile as Maya approached the reference desk. "I'm trying to learn about the history of my neighborhood," Maya said, which was true, even if it wasn't the complete truth. "Specifically, about a family called Morrison who used to live on my street." Mrs. Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "Local history is fascinating, isn't it? Let me show you where we keep the historical archives and newspaper records. What time period are you looking at?" Maya realized she didn't actually know when the Morrison family had lived in the house, only that Mrs. Patterson had said it was about 40 years ago. Maybe the 1980s, she guessed. Mrs. Rodriguez led Maya to a computer terminal where digitized newspaper records were stored. "This should get you started. The Baltimore Sun has been digitized back to the 1960s, so you should be able to find quite a bit of information about neighborhood happenings." Maya thanked Mrs. Rodriguez and settled in at the computer. She started with a simple search for Morrison Maple Street and was surprised when several results appeared immediately. But as she clicked on the first link, her excitement quickly turned to something much more complicated. The headline read, "8-year-old boy disappears from East Baltimore home." The article was dated September 15th, 1987, and the boy's name was Marcus Morrison. The address listed was the exact address of the abandoned house at the end of Maya's street. Maya's hands felt suddenly cold as she read the article. Marcus Morrison had vanished from his bedroom sometime during the night of September 14th. His parents, Robert and Linda Morrison, had put him to bed at his usual time and found his room empty the next morning. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken windows or forced entry. The boy had simply disappeared. A follow-up article from a week later provided few additional details. The police had no leads and no suspects. Marcus Morrison's disappearance remained a complete mystery. The final article Maya could find was dated 6 months later and was heartbreakingly brief. "Morrison family leaves Baltimore following son's disappearance." Maya sat back in her chair, her mind reeling. A child had disappeared from the house that Max was now inexplicably drawn to. A child who would be about her mother's age now, if he was still alive. A child whose family had been so devastated by his loss that they left their home and never came back. Now Maya understood why Nana and Mrs. Patterson hadn't wanted to discuss the Morrison house. This wasn't just a story about former neighbors or changing neighborhoods. This was about a family destroyed by an unthinkable tragedy. But as Maya walked home that afternoon, Max trotting contentedly beside her until they approached the Morrison house, where he again began pulling toward the gate, she found herself with more questions than answers. Why was Max so interested in a house where something terrible had happened nearly 40 years ago? What was he sensing that Maya couldn't detect? And why did she have the uncomfortable feeling that there was more to Marcus Morrison's story than what she had found in those newspaper articles? That night, as Maya lay in bed, listening to Max pace restlessly around her room, she made a decision that would change everything. She was going to find out what had really happened to Marcus Morrison. Not because she wanted to satisfy her curiosity, but because somewhere deep in her heart she felt like she owed it to that 8-year-old boy who had vanished from his bedroom. All those years ago, Maya had no way of knowing that this decision would lead her to discoveries that would shake the very foundation of everything she believed about her own life. She had no way of knowing that Max's strange behavior was about to make perfect, heartbreaking sense. And she certainly had no way of knowing that the Morrison house was about to give up secrets that powerful people had spent decades trying to keep buried. The opportunity presented itself on a Thursday afternoon when Sarah had to work a double shift at the hospital and Nana was visiting her sister across town. Maya found herself alone with Max and a burning curiosity that had been building for days since her library discovery. She had spent the past 3 nights lying awake, thinking about Marcus Morrison and wondering what secrets the abandoned house might still hold. Max seemed to sense Maya's intentions before she had fully formed them herself. As soon as she clipped his leash to his collar that afternoon, he headed straight for the front door with an eagerness that made Maya's heart race. They walked down Maple Street at a deliberately casual pace, Maya trying to appear as though they were simply taking their normal route, but her palms were sweating despite the cool October air. When they reached the Morrison house, Max immediately pulled toward the rusty gate that blocked the front walkway. The chain holding it shut was old and corroded but still secure. Maya stood at the gate for several minutes, one hand resting on Max's head while she studied the house more carefully than she ever had before. Up close, the decay was even more apparent. The wooden porch steps were rotted through in several places, creating dark holes that looked like missing teeth. The railing had partially collapsed on the left side, leaving jagged pieces of wood jutting at dangerous angles. Several of the windows on the first floor had boards that were loose or missing entirely, revealing dark spaces beyond that Maya couldn't quite see into. But despite its deteriorated condition, there was something about the house that suggested it hadn't been completely abandoned all these years. The weeds in the front yard, while tall and wild, weren't the impenetrable jungle Maya would have expected after 4 decades of neglect. Someone had been maintaining the property at least minimally, cutting back the growth just enough to prevent it from taking over completely. Maya walked around to the side of the house, looking for another way in. The chain on the front gate was intimidating, but houses this old often had multiple entrances. She found what she was looking for along the left side of the property, a narrow gap in the hedge where the previous winter's snow had broken several branches and created an opening just wide enough for someone Maya's size to squeeze through. Max immediately pushed through the gap without hesitation, as though he had been waiting for exactly this opportunity. Maya followed, her jacket catching on the remaining branches as she wiggled through. Once inside the property boundaries, she found herself in what had once been a side yard, but was now an overgrown wilderness of tall grass and volunteer trees. The side of the house revealed more details about its construction and history. Maya could see where additions had been made over the years, creating a complex roofline with multiple levels and architectural styles. Near the back of the house, she noticed a small basement window that was partially hidden by an overgrown shrub, but appeared to be unboarded. But it was Max's behavior that truly captured Maya's attention. The golden retriever was no longer simply interested in the house. He was agitated, pacing back and forth along the foundation, with his nose close to the ground, whining softly in a way Maya had never heard before. His tail was tucked low, and his ears were flattened against his head in an expression Maya recognized as deeply troubled. "What is it, boy?" Maya whispered, following Max as he circled toward the back of the house. "What do you smell?" The back porch was in even worse condition than the front, with most of the floorboards completely rotted away, leaving only the structural joists exposed. But as Maya carefully stepped around the deteriorated sections, testing each board before putting her full weight on it, she noticed something that made her pulse quicken. Under one of the loose porch boards, something metallic glinted in the afternoon sunlight. Maya knelt down carefully, aware that the wood beneath her might not hold, and worked the board free with her fingers. Underneath, nestled in the dirt and debris that had accumulated over the years, was a small brass key. The key was heavily tarnished and spotted with rust, but Maya could see that it was old-fashioned, the kind with an ornate head that belonged to interior doors rather than modern locks. As she picked it up, Brushing away the dirt and examining it more closely, Max's agitation intensified. He pressed against her leg, looking up at her with an expression that seemed almost like pleading. Maya's heart was pounding as she looked. From the key to the house and back again. She knew she was standing at a crossroads. She could take the key home, show it to Nana or her mother, and let the adults decide what to do with it. That would be the safe choice, the responsible choice, the choice that wouldn't get her into trouble. But Maya also knew that if she left now, if she handed this mystery over to adults who had already made it clear they didn't want her involved, she would never learn the truth about what had happened to Marcus Morrison. The newspaper articles had raised more questions than they had answered, and Maya had the distinct feeling that the official story was incomplete. Standing there in the overgrown backyard of the Morrison house, holding a key that someone had hidden. Decades ago, Maya made the decision that would change her life forever. She was going to go inside. The key fit perfectly into the back door's lock, turning with only slight resistance despite its age. The door opened with a creak that seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet afternoon air. Max immediately pushed past Maya and disappeared into the dark interior, his nails clicking on what sounded like hardwood floors. Maya hesitated at the threshold. Breaking and entering was a serious crime, even if the building appeared to be abandoned. But as she stood there, she realized that someone had been maintaining this house, at least to some degree. The key had been deliberately hidden, not lost. Someone had wanted it to be found, but only by someone persistent enough to look for it. The interior of the house was surprisingly well preserved, though thick with dust and the musty smell of a building that had been closed up for too long. Maya found herself in a kitchen with vintage appliances and countertops that probably dated to the 1970s. Afternoon light filtered through gaps in the boarded windows, creating streaks of illumination that made the dust particles dance like tiny spirits. Maya followed the sound of Max's movement deeper into the house. He had gone straight to a door that appeared to lead to the basement, where he was now scratching frantically at the wood and whining in that same troubled way he had exhibited outside. The basement door was unlocked. Maya descended the creaky wooden steps carefully, using her phone's flashlight to illuminate the way. The basement was exactly what she expected from a house this age. Low ceiling, concrete floor, stone foundation walls, and the lingering smell of decades-old dampness. But what Maya didn't expect was Max's immediate focus on one particular section of the basement wall. The dog was pawing at what appeared to be a section of paneling that didn't quite match the rest of the wall. As Maya shone her light on the area, she could see that the paneling was actually concealing something. The edges didn't align properly with the surrounding stonework. Maya ran her hands along the paneling, looking for a way to move it. Near the bottom right corner, she found a section that gave slightly under pressure. Working her fingers into the gap, she managed to swing the panel aside like a door, revealing a hidden space behind the basement wall. The beam of her phone light revealed a small room, perhaps 6 feet square, that had been deliberately concealed from view. And in that room, carefully preserved and organized, was evidence that made Maya's breath catch in her throat. Newspaper clippings about Marcus Morrison's disappearance were tacked to one wall, including articles Maya hadn't found in her library. Research. Photographs of the Morrison family were arranged on a makeshift shelf, showing a happy family with a boy who looked to be about 8 years old, with dark hair and a gap-toothed grin. There was a small desk with notebooks and what appeared to be investigative files and boxes of documents that looked official and important. But what truly shocked Maya was the realization that this wasn't just a storage space where someone had collected information about the Morrison family. This was an active investigation room, and someone had been working in it recently. The documents were organized in a way that suggested ongoing research, and there was no dust on the desk surface, despite the basement's general state of neglect. Max had followed Maya into the hidden room and was now sitting quietly beside her. his earlier agitation replaced by what seemed like satisfaction. It was as though he had been trying to lead her to this place all along, and now that she had found it, his job was complete. Maya stood in the small room, surrounded by evidence of a mystery that had consumed someone's attention for what appeared to be years, and realized that her simple curiosity about her dog's odd behavior had led her into something far more complex and potentially dangerous than she had ever imagined. Someone had been investigating Marcus Morrison's disappearance for decades, and now Maya had stumbled into the middle of their work. The question was, who had created this hidden room, and were they friend or foe? As Maya began to examine the documents more carefully, taking pictures with her phone to preserve what she was seeing, she made another disturbing discovery. Some of the newspaper clippings were marked with handwritten notes in the margins, and the handwriting looked familiar. She couldn't place it immediately, but she had the unsettling feeling that she had seen it before. Maya knew she needed to leave the house and process what she had discovered, but she also knew that her investigation was just beginning. The hidden room contained answers to questions she hadn't even thought to ask yet, and she suspected that Marcus Morrison's disappearance was connected to secrets that powerful people had worked very hard to keep buried. As she carefully replaced the panel and made her way back upstairs with Max, Maya realized that she was no longer just a curious child trying to understand her dog's strange behavior. She had become part of a decades-old mystery that someone had risked everything to solve. And now, whether she liked it or not, Maya was committed to seeing it through to the end. Maya managed to maintain her composure until she was safely back in her bedroom with the door closed. But once alone, the magnitude of what she had discovered hit her with full force. Her hands were shaking as she scrolled through the photographs she had taken in the hidden room, each image revealing details she hadn't had time to process fully while standing in that secret space. The newspaper clippings were the most straightforward evidence, but Maya realized now that there had been far more articles about Marcus Morrison's disappearance than she had found in her initial library research. The hidden room contained coverage from multiple newspapers, not just the Baltimore Sun, and the articles told a more complex story than the simple boy disappears mysteriously narrative Maya had initially uncovered. According to the clippings, there had been significant inconsistencies in the initial police investigation. Neighbors had reported seeing unfamiliar cars in the area on the night Marcus disappeared, but these reports weren't followed up on systematically. There had been a search of the Morrison house and property that turned up no evidence of foul play, but several articles questioned whether the search had been thorough enough. Most disturbing of all, Maya found references to other children who had gone missing from Baltimore neighborhoods around the same time period. The articles didn't explicitly connect these disappearances, but someone, presumably whoever had created the hidden room, had drawn lines between the cases with red ink, suggesting patterns that the official investigations had missed. Maya tried to act normally when Sarah came home from her double shift that evening, but her mother immediately noticed something was different. "You seem distracted tonight, sweetheart," Sarah said as they sat down to dinner. Nana had returned from visiting her sister and was telling them about her day, but Maya found it difficult to concentrate on the conversation. "Everything okay? At school?" "Fine," Maya said quickly, then realized her response had been too abrupt. "Just thinking about a project I'm working on." Nana looked up from her plate with the sharp attention Maya had learned to recognize. Despite her grandmother's gentle demeanor, she had an uncanny ability to detect when something was bothering the people she loved. What kind of project? Maya's mind raced. She needed a cover story that would explain any odd behavior while she continued her investigation. "Local history," she said, which was technically true. "I'm researching the neighborhood for a school assignment." "That sounds fascinating," Sarah said. But Nana's expression had grown more cautious. "What aspect of the neighborhood history are you focusing on?" Nana asked carefully. Maya took a breath, deciding to test the waters. "I'm particularly interested in the Morrison family who used to live at the end of our street." Do you remember them? The change in both women was immediate and unmistakable. Sarah's fork paused halfway to her mouth, and Nana's entire posture stiffened. The comfortable family atmosphere that had filled the kitchen moments before was replaced by a tension so thick Maya could practically feel it pressing against her skin. "Maya," Nana said slowly, "I thought we discussed this already. That's not an appropriate topic for a school project." "But why not?" Maya pressed, emboldened by her newfound knowledge. "It's part of our neighborhood's history. A family lived there and then they didn't. That's exactly the kind of thing local history projects are supposed to explore." Sarah and Nana exchanged a look that Maya recognized but had never been able to interpret. It was the kind of wordless communication that happened between adults when they were trying to decide how much truth a child could handle. "Some historical events are too personal, too painful for the families involved," Sarah said finally. "It wouldn't be respectful to turn someone else's tragedy into a school assignment." Maya wanted to argue, to point out that Marcus Morrison's disappearance was already a matter of public record, documented in newspaper articles and police reports that anyone could access. But she realized that pushing too hard would only make her family more suspicious of her interests. She needed to be more subtle if she wanted to continue her investigation without interference. "I understand," Maya said, though she didn't mean it. "I'll choose a different topic." But as the evening progressed, Maya noticed that Nana was watching her more carefully than usual, and Sarah kept starting to say something and then stopping herself, as though she was fighting an internal battle about whether to share information Maya wasn't supposed to have. The next day at school, Maya found it almost impossible to concentrate on her regular classes. Her mind kept drifting back to the hidden room and all the questions it had raised. During lunch, she used the computer in the school library to research the other missing children cases that had been referenced in the newspaper clippings. What she found was deeply troubling. Between 1985 and 1989, 7 children had disappeared from Baltimore neighborhoods under circumstances that shared disturbing similarities. All were between the ages of 7 and 10. All had vanished from their homes during overnight hours with no signs of struggle or forced entry. And in every case, the initial police investigations had been quickly closed due to lack of evidence. But Maya also noticed something the newspapers hadn't reported. 5 of the 7 families, including the Morrisons, had left Baltimore within a year of their child's disappearance. That seemed like more than a coincidence, especially when Maya considered how difficult it would be for families to relocate during what must have been the most traumatic period of their lives. That afternoon, Maya made a decision that she knew was risky, but felt necessary. She needed to return to the Morrison house and examine the hidden room more thoroughly. The photographs she had taken were helpful, but she needed to actually read the documents and understand the full scope of whoever's investigation she had stumbled into. This time, Maya was more careful about her approach. She waited until she was certain none of her neighbors were outside, and she brought a small flashlight instead of relying on her phone for illumination. Max was even more eager than before to reach the house, pulling so hard on his leash that Maya had to wrap it around her wrist to maintain control. Inside the hidden room, Maya began systematically photographing every document and every page of the notebook she had seen. As she worked, she began to understand that whoever had created this space wasn't just collecting information about Marcus Morrison's disappearance. They were building a comprehensive case that connected multiple missing children cases to a pattern of police negligence or corruption. The notebooks contained detailed timelines, maps of the neighborhoods where the children had lived, and most significantly, a list of names that appeared in multiple case files. Some were police officers, others were city officials, and several were local business leaders whose relevance to the investigations wasn't immediately clear to Maya. But as she photographed the final notebook, Maya made a discovery that sent chills down her spine. On the last page, someone had written a list of addresses. The first address on the list was her own house on Maple Street. Maya stared at the page, trying to understand why her family's address would be included in an investigation about missing children from the 1980s. Her family had lived in their house for as long as Maya could remember, but now she wondered, when exactly had they moved to Maple Street? And was their presence in the neighborhood somehow connected to Marcus Morrison's disappearance? As Maya prepared to leave the hidden room, she noticed something she had missed on her first visit. In the corner, partially hidden behind one of the document boxes, was a manila folder with Johnson Family written on the tab in the same handwriting that had marked the newspaper articles. Maya's blood ran cold as she realized that whoever had been investigating the Morrison case for all these years had also been investigating her own family. The folder was thick, suggesting it contained substantial information, but Maya didn't dare open it in the hidden room where she might be discovered. Instead, she slipped the folder into her backpack, planning to examine its contents in the safety of her own bedroom. But as Maya and Max made their way out of the Morrison house, she had the unmistakable feeling that they were being watched. She turned to look back at the house before squeezing through the gap in the hedge, and for just a moment, she thought she saw a shadow move past one of the upstairs windows. Maya's hands were shaking as she hurried home with Max, the stolen folder, seeming to burn against her back through the backpack. She had started this investigation thinking she was solving a decades-old mystery about a missing boy. But now, she was beginning to suspect that the mystery was far from historical. Someone was still actively working on this case, and Maya had just walked directly into the middle of their investigation. Even worse, it appeared that her own family was somehow connected to secrets that Maya had never imagined existed. The folder in her backpack might contain answers to questions she wasn't sure she was ready to ask, but Maya knew she had crossed a line from which there was no return. Whatever truth was hidden in that manila folder, she was about to learn that some family secrets were kept for very good reasons. Maya waited until both Sarah and Nana were asleep before opening the Johnson family folder in her bedroom. Max lay beside her on the bed, seemingly sensing the importance of the moment as Maya spread the documents across her comforter with trembling hands. The first document in the folder was a copy of a lease agreement dated October 1987, just 1 month after Marcus Morrison's disappearance. According to the paperwork, Dorothy Johnson, Nana, had signed a rental agreement for their house on Maple Street. But what struck Maya as odd was that the lease was for a significantly below-market rent, almost as though someone had wanted to ensure the Johnson family could afford to live in that specific location. The second document was even more puzzling. A letter from Baltimore Social Services dated November 1987, referencing ongoing support services for the Johnson family and specifically mentioning trauma counseling for the minor child in the household. Maya read the letter 3 times before the implications sank in. The minor child referenced in the letter would have been her mother, Sarah, who would have been 11 years old in 1987, exactly Maya's current age. But it was the third document that made Maya's world tilt on its axis. It was a handwritten note, clearly written by the same person who had created the hidden room, and it contained a timeline that Maya read with growing horror. September 14th, 1987, Marcus Morrison disappears. October 15th, 1987, Johnson family moves to Maple Street. November 3, 1987, Social Services begins trauma counseling for Sarah Johnson. December 1987, Dorothy Johnson begins asking neighbors about Morrison case. January 1988, police warn Dorothy Johnson to stop investigating. The note continued with entries spanning several years, documenting what appeared to be Nana's persistent efforts to investigate Marcus Morrison's disappearance, despite official pressure to stop. The final entry, dated just 6 months ago, simply said, "Sarah's daughter shows no awareness of family history. Maybe time to tell her the truth." Maya set down the papers with hands that had gone completely numb. The implications were staggering, and she found herself questioning everything she thought she knew about her family's history. Why had they moved to Maple Street immediately after Marcus Morrison's disappearance? Why had her mother needed trauma counseling? And what truth was someone planning to tell Maya? Sleep was impossible that night. Maya lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with questions and possibilities. When morning finally came, she felt as though she had been awake for weeks. At breakfast, Maya studied her mother and grandmother with new eyes, looking for signs of the secrets they had been keeping. Sarah seemed tired, which wasn't unusual given her demanding work schedule, but Nana appeared genuinely troubled, picking at her food and glancing frequently at Maya, as though she was struggling with an internal debate. "I think I might walk a different route to school today," Maya said casually, testing to see if her family would react to any mention of changing her routine. "Why?" Nana asked immediately, her attention sharpening in a way that confirmed Maya's growing suspicions about her family's hypervigilance. "Just for variety," Maya said. "Maybe I'll go down Franklin Avenue instead of Maple Street." "I think Maple Street is safer," Sarah said quickly. "Less traffic, and Mrs. Patterson always keeps an eye out for the neighborhood children." Maya nodded and finished her breakfast, but she was already planning her afternoon investigation. She needed to return to the Morrison house one more time, and she needed to have a very careful conversation with Mrs. Patterson about exactly what she remembered from 1987. At school that day, Maya found it impossible to focus on her classes. During lunch, she sat in the library and used the computer to search for more information about childhood trauma counseling in the 1980s, trying to understand what could have happened to her mother that would require professional intervention. What she learned was disturbing. The type of counseling referenced in the social services letter was typically provided to children who had witnessed violence or had been victims of crimes themselves. The duration of the services. The letter mentioned ongoing support for over 2 years, suggested that whatever Sarah had experienced had been severe and long-lasting in its effects. After school, Maya approached Mrs. Patterson's house with a carefully prepared story. She found the elderly woman sitting on her front porch as usual, a cup of coffee balanced on the arm of her rocking chair, and her ever-present binoculars resting in her lap. "Afternoon, Mrs. Patterson," Maya said, with what she hoped was casual friendliness. "Well, hello there, Maya. How was school today?" "Good, thank you, Mrs. Patterson. I was wondering if I could ask you something about the neighborhood's history." "For a school project," Maya added quickly. Mrs. Patterson's expression became guarded, much like Nana's had when Maya had asked about the Morrison family. "What kind of history are you interested in?" "I'm trying to understand how the neighborhood has changed over the years, like when different families moved in and out." Maya paused, then decided to be more direct. "My grandmother mentioned that you've lived here longer than anyone. Do you remember when my family first moved to Maple Street?" Mrs. Patterson was quiet for a long moment, studying Maya's face with sharp eyes. "Your grandmother never mentioned your family's early days here?" "Not really. I know we moved here when my mom was young, but I don't know much about why or exactly when." Mrs. Patterson sighed deeply, the sound carrying decades of accumulated neighborhood knowledge and carefully kept secrets. "Child, your family came to this street during a very difficult time. There had been troubles in the neighborhood, and people were scared. Your grandmother was brave to move here when she did." "What kind of troubles?" "The Morrison boy," Mrs. Patterson said reluctantly. "Marcus. He disappeared right from his bedroom, and nobody ever found out what happened to him. The whole neighborhood was terrified that whoever took him might come back for other children." Maya felt her pulse quicken. "Do you remember anything specific about that time, about what people thought might have happened?" Mrs. Patterson looked around nervously, as though checking to make sure they weren't being overheard. "There were rumors," she said quietly. "People said the police didn't investigate as thoroughly as they should have. Some folks thought there was a cover-up, that someone with influence was protecting whoever took that boy." "What made people think that?" Your grandmother, for one. Dorothy asked a lot of questions in those early months after you all moved here. She talked to everyone who had lived here when Marcus disappeared, trying to piece together what really happened that night. But then she got a visit from some police officers who told her to stop stirring up trouble, and after that, she never mentioned the Morrison case again. Maya felt pieces of the puzzle beginning to click into place. Mrs. Patterson, do you remember exactly when my family moved to Maple Street? October 1987, Mrs. Patterson said without hesitation. I remember because it was right around Halloween, and your mother was so excited about trick-or-treating in a new neighborhood. Poor little thing had been through such a difficult time before you all moved here. Difficult time. Mrs. Patterson's expression became sad and protective. That's not my story to tell, child, but your mother was a very frightened little girl. When she first came to this street, it took months before she would play outside alone or walk anywhere without your grandmother right beside her. Maya's mind was reeling. Everything Mrs. Patterson was telling her confirmed what she had read in the stolen documents, but it also raised new questions about her mother's trauma and its connection to the Morrison case. That afternoon, Maya made her third trip to the Morrison house, but this time she wasn't alone. As she approached the gap in the hedge, she could see that Max was even more agitated than usual, whining and pulling toward the house with an urgency that bordered on desperation. Inside the hidden room, Maya made a discovery that changed everything. In a box she hadn't fully explored on her previous visits, she found personal items that had clearly belonged to Marcus Morrison. There were school photos, a small toy car, a few books with his name written in the front covers in a child's careful handwriting. But it was the baseball glove that made Maya's breath catch in her throat. The leather was old and worn, clearly well loved by a child who had spent countless hours playing catch. On the palm of the glove, someone had used a black marker to write MM in block letters, and below that, in smaller script, Future Baltimore Oriole. Maya held the glove in her hands and felt an overwhelming wave of sadness for the little boy who would never grow up to play professional baseball, who would never become whatever he had dreamed of becoming. But as she examined the glove more closely, she made another discovery that sent chills down her spine. The glove wasn't covered in decades of dust like everything else in the basement. It had been handled recently, and there were fresh fingerprints on the leather surface. Someone else had been visiting this hidden room, someone who had held Marcus Morrison's baseball glove in their hands, just as Maya was doing now. Maya quickly photographed the glove and the other personal items, but as she worked, she became increasingly aware that the atmosphere in the hidden room felt different than it had on her previous visits. Items had been moved slightly, documents had been reorganized, and there was a sense that someone had been there very recently. As Maya prepared to leave, she heard something that made her freeze in terror, footsteps on the floor above her head. Someone was in the Morrison house, walking around the main level while Maya was trapped in the hidden basement room. Maya turned off her flashlight and pressed herself against the wall, her heart pounding so loudly she was afraid whoever was upstairs might hear it. Max was trembling beside her, sensing the danger, but remaining perfectly quiet, as though he understood the need for silence. The footsteps moved purposefully through the house, pausing at what sounded like the basement door. Maya held her breath, praying that whoever was up there wouldn't decide to come downstairs. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few minutes, the footsteps moved away from the basement door and continued through the house. Eventually, Maya heard the sound of the back door closing, and then silence returned to the Morrison house. She waited several more minutes before daring to move, then quickly gathered her things and made her way upstairs with Max close beside her. As they left the house through the back door, Maya noticed something that confirmed her worst fears. There were fresh tire tracks in the overgrown driveway, and they were too recent to have been made by maintenance workers or city officials. Someone had been watching the Morrison house, and Maya suspected they had been watching her as well. The investigation she had thought was historical and safe was turning out to be immediate and dangerous, and Maya was beginning to realize that the secrets surrounding Marcus Morrison's disappearance were still actively being protected by someone who would go to great lengths to keep them buried. The next morning brought Maya a discovery that shifted her investigation from puzzling mystery to something far more sinister. While reviewing the photographs she had taken in the hidden room, she noticed details she had missed in the dim basement lighting. Mixed in with the documents and personal items were several empty police evidence bags, the kind with official Baltimore Police Department seals and case numbers printed on them. Maya zoomed in on the clearest photo and could make out a case number that corresponded to Marcus Morrison's disappearance. But what troubled her most was the condition of the bags. They had clearly been opened and emptied, their contents removed by someone who had access to official police evidence. This discovery forced Maya to confront a possibility she had been trying to avoid. The Morrison case wasn't just a cold case that had gone unsolved due to lack of leads. There was evidence that official police evidence had been deliberately removed from the investigation, suggesting a level of corruption or cover-up that reached into the Baltimore Police Department itself. Maya spent her lunch period at school researching Detective James Wilson, the investigating officer mentioned in the newspaper articles. What she found painted a disturbing picture. Wilson had been a respected detective with over 15 years of experience when he was assigned to the Morrison case. His track record included several high-profile solved cases, and he had been considered one of the department's most capable investigators. But 6 months after Marcus Morrison's disappearance, Wilson had suddenly requested early retirement. The brief newspaper article announcing his departure mentioned personal reasons and desire to spend more time with family. But the timing seemed suspicious to Maya. Experienced detectives didn't typically retire in the middle of major unsolved cases unless something significant had forced their hand. Maya found one interview Wilson had given to a local newspaper shortly after his retirement, in which he made a cryptic comment that stayed with her for the rest of the day. Sometimes the hardest part of police work isn't finding the truth, it's deciding what to do when the truth puts good people in danger. That evening, Maya decided she could no longer continue her investigation without confronting her family about their connection to the Morrison case. The evidence she had gathered made it clear that her family's move to Maple Street hadn't been coincidental, and she needed to understand why they had been involved in events surrounding Marcus's disappearance. She waited until dinner was nearly finished, then took a deep breath and dove in. "I need to ask you both about something important," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I know our family is somehow connected to Marcus Morrison's disappearance." The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Sarah dropped her fork with a clatter that echoed through the suddenly silent kitchen, and Nana's face went pale in a way that made her look every one of her 73 years. "Maya," Nana said carefully, "what makes you think—" "I found documents," Maya interrupted, deciding the partial truth was safer than revealing the full extent of her investigation. "In the library. Records that show we moved to this street right after Marcus disappeared and that Mom needed trauma counseling. I know you've been keeping secrets from me, and I need to understand why." Sarah and Nana exchanged another one of those loaded looks, and Maya could see her mother struggling with how much to reveal. Finally, Sarah spoke in a voice that was barely above a whisper. "Maya, there are some things about our family's history that we've never told you because we wanted to protect you. But you're old enough now and smart enough that maybe—" She looked at Nana, who gave a reluctant nod. "Your mother witnessed something terrible when she was your age," Nana said slowly. "Something that put our entire family in danger. We moved to this neighborhood because the police thought it would be safer for us here, where we could keep an eye on the Morrison house and make sure no one else was hurt." Maya felt her pulse quicken. What did Mom witness? Sarah was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she looked at her daughter. "I saw Marcus Morrison being taken from his house," she said in a broken voice. "I was walking home late from a friend's house, and I saw a man carrying him to a car. I tried to call for help, but by the time anyone came, they were gone." A revelation hit Maya like a physical blow. Her mother had been a witness to Marcus Morrison's abduction, and her family had been living with this secret for Maya's entire life. Everything suddenly made sense. The move to Maple Street, the trauma counseling, Nana's protective vigilance, and their reluctance to discuss the Morrison case. "Who was it?" Maya asked. "Who took Marcus?" Nana and Sarah exchanged another look, and Maya could see they were still holding back crucial information. "That's where it gets complicated," Nana said finally. "Sarah saw what happened, but the person who took Marcus was someone powerful, someone with connections to the police department and city government. When we tried to report what Sarah had seen, we were told that it would be dangerous for our family if we pursued it." "Dangerous? How?" "Threats," Sarah said quietly. "Someone made it clear that if I testified about what I had seen, something bad would happen to you and Nana. So we agreed to stay quiet, but we moved to Maple Street so I could keep an eye on the Morrison house and make sure he never came back." Maya felt a mixture of anger and fear rising in her chest. "So Marcus's killer is still out there? Still free?" "Not just free," Nana said grimly. "Successful. Respected. The man who took Marcus Morrison has spent the last 37 years building a career and a reputation, while that little boy's family has never had closure." Maya pushed back from the table, her mind reeling. Everything she had discovered in the hidden room suddenly took on new significance. Someone had been building a case against Marcus's killer for decades, collecting evidence and preparing for the day when justice might finally be possible. "There's something else," Maya said, making a decision that would irrevocably change their family dynamic. "I think someone else is investigating the Morrison case. Someone who's been gathering evidence for years." Both Sarah and Nana went very still. "What do you mean?" Nana asked carefully. "I found a phone number," Maya lied, not wanting to reveal the full extent of her breaking and entering. "For a private investigator named Chen, who worked on missing children cases in the 1980s. I think he might still be working on Marcus's case." Nana was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried a weight that Maya had never heard before. "Robert Chen," she said. "He was the only person who believed Sarah's story, the only one who thought the case could still be solved. You know him. He's been waiting 37 years for someone in our family to be ready to tell the truth," Nana said. "Maybe it's time." That night, Maya lay in bed thinking about everything that had been revealed. Her family wasn't just connected to the Morrison case. They were key witnesses whose testimony could potentially solve a decades-old murder. But they were also potential victims, people who had been living under an implicit threat for most of Maya's life. As she drifted off to sleep, Maya made a decision that would define the rest of her investigation. She was going to contact Robert Chen, not just to learn more about Marcus Morrison's disappearance, but to find out if there was finally enough evidence to bring his killer to justice. What Maya didn't know was that by tomorrow evening, she would learn the identity of Marcus Morrison's killer and discover that he had been watching her family for decades, waiting for the day when one of them might be brave enough or foolish enough to break their silence. The hidden room in the Morrison house wasn't just a collection point for evidence about a cold case. It was a war room in an ongoing battle between justice and power, and Maya had just enlisted herself as a soldier in a fight that had been raging since before she was born. But first, she needed to understand exactly what evidence Robert Chen had gathered, and whether it would be enough to protect her family when the time came to finally tell the truth about what Sarah had witnessed on that terrible night in 1987. The revelation that her mother had witnessed Marcus Morrison's abduction should have satisfied Maya's need for answers, but instead it only intensified her drive to understand the full truth. Sarah's account explained why their family had moved to Maple Street, but it didn't explain who had created the hidden room in the Morrison house or why someone was still actively investigating the case after nearly 4 decades. Maya found her opportunity for further investigation on Saturday morning when Sarah left for an emergency shift at the hospital, and Nana announced she was going to spend the day visiting friends at her senior center. For the first time in days, Maya had the house to herself. She started her search in Nana's bedroom, feeling guilty about violating her grandmother's privacy, but driven by the certainty that there were still secrets being kept from her. Nana's room was neat and organized, with decades of accumulated memories carefully preserved in photo albums and memory boxes. Maya began with the dresser drawers, looking for anything that might relate to the Morrison case or their family's involvement. In the bottom drawer, underneath a collection of Sarah's childhood school reports and art projects, Maya found a small wooden box that had been pushed toward the very back of the drawer. Inside the box were letters, dozens of them, all in Nana's careful handwriting, all addressed to the Baltimore Police Department, the mayor's office, or various newspaper editors. But as Maya read through them, she realized with growing amazement that they had never been sent. These were draft letters, written and rewritten over the course of years, documenting Nana's struggle with whether to speak publicly about what she knew regarding Marcus Morrison's disappearance. One letter, dated just 2 months after Marcus's disappearance, was particularly revealing. Dear Detective Wilson, I am writing to report information about the Marcus Morrison case that I believe may be important to your investigation. On the night of September 14th, I was unable to sleep and was sitting by my bedroom window when I observed a black sedan parked outside the Morrison house at approximately 2:30 a.m. The car remained there for nearly 30 minutes, and I saw a man get out and approach the house. I recognized the car because I had seen it before in our neighborhood, always late at night and always parked in locations where it wouldn't be easily noticed by other residents. The license plate number was Maryland tags, beginning with DH, followed by numbers I couldn't make out clearly in the darkness. What troubles me most is that I have seen this same car parked near other houses in our neighborhood where children live, always during overnight hours when most people would be asleep. I believe someone has been watching the children in our area, and I fear that Marcus Morrison may not have been a random victim. I have not come forward with this information immediately because I am frightened for my own family's safety. My daughter Sarah has already been through enough trauma, and I'm concerned that speaking publicly about what I observed might put her in additional danger. However, I cannot remain silent if my information might help find Marcus or prevent other children from being harmed. Please contact me if you would like to discuss what I observed in more detail. Sincerely, Dorothy Johnson. Maya read the letter 3 times, her understanding of her family's situation becoming clearer with each reading. Nana hadn't just been a concerned neighbor who had moved to Maple Street to keep watch over the Morrison house. She had been a witness herself, someone who had observed suspicious activity in the neighborhood before Marcus's disappearance. The reference to license plates, beginning with DH, was particularly significant. Maya remembered seeing those initials in the hidden room documents, associated with someone named David Hartwell. Now she understood that Nana had actually seen the killer's car and had been too frightened to report it officially. Maya continued, reading through the unsent letters, finding multiple drafts that revealed Nana's ongoing internal struggle between her desire for justice and her fear for her family's safety. One letter, dated 6 months after Marcus's disappearance, contained information that made Maya's blood run cold. I have learned the identity of the man I observed outside the Morrison house on the night Marcus disappeared. David Hartwell is the son of City Councilman Richard Hartwell and currently works as an assistant in the mayor's office. This information makes me understand why Detective Wilson seemed reluctant to pursue the lead I provided about the suspicious car. I have since observed David Hartwell's vehicle in our neighborhood on multiple occasions, and I believe he has been watching my family because he suspects we may have information about his involvement in Marcus Morrison's disappearance. Last week, I received an anonymous phone call warning me that curious neighbors sometimes have accidents and suggesting that I would be wise to focus on my own family's welfare rather than asking questions about missing children. I'm now convinced that Marcus Morrison was killed by David Hartwell and that his father's political connections have enabled a cover-up of the crime. However, I'm also convinced that coming forward with this information would result in harm to my daughter, who has already suffered enough trauma. I pray that someday the truth will come to light through other means, and that Marcus's family will finally receive the justice they deserve. Maya set down the letter with trembling hands. Everything was becoming clear now. David Hartwell, the son of a powerful politician, had killed Marcus Morrison and had used his family's influence to cover up the crime. Sarah had witnessed the abduction, and Nana had identified the killer's vehicle, but both had been terrorized into silence through threats against their family. But the dates on the letters revealed something even more troubling. The most recent letter in the box was dated just 3 years ago, suggesting that Nana had continued to struggle with the decision about whether to come forward well into Maya's childhood. The letter contained updates about David Hartwell's career advancement. He was now a city councilman himself, following in his father's political footsteps, and Nana's growing frustration with watching Marcus's killer achieve success and recognition. While his victim remained forgotten, Maya realized that her family had been living under a cloud of fear and secrecy for her entire life, unable to speak the truth about a murder they had witnessed because the killer was too powerful to challenge safely. But she also realized that someone else had been working to build a case against David Hartwell, collecting the evidence that Maya had found in the hidden room. When Nana returned home that afternoon, Maya was waiting for her in the kitchen with the box of unsent letters spread across the table. Nana stopped in the doorway when she saw them, her face cycling through surprise, resignation, and finally a kind of relief. "I wondered when you would find those," Nana said quietly, settling into her chair across from Maya. "I suppose I'm not as good at keeping secrets as I thought I was." "Why didn't you send them?" Maya asked. "Any one of these letters could have helped solve Marcus's case." Nana was quiet for a long moment, her weathered hands folded in her lap. "Because I was a coward," she said finally. "Because I chose my family's safety over justice for that little boy, and I've regretted it every day since. But you know who killed him. David Hartwell. You identified his car." "Knowing and proving are two different things, Maya. David Hartwell came from a powerful family, and he had powerful friends. Even if the police had taken my report seriously, which they wouldn't have, it would have been my word against his. And his family had the resources to destroy mine if they felt threatened." Maya looked at her grandmother and saw not the strong, wise woman she had always admired, but a frightened person who had been carrying an impossible burden for decades. "But things are different now," Maya said. "You have evidence. Someone has been collecting proof against David Hartwell for years." Nana's expression sharpened. "What do you mean?" Maya took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would change everything between them. "I've been inside the Morrison house, Nana. I found the hidden room where someone has been building a case against David Hartwell. I think it's time to contact Robert Chen and find out if we finally have enough evidence to bring Marcus's killer to justice." The silence that followed lasted for several minutes, during which Maya could see her grandmother weighing decades of fear against the possibility of finally speaking the truth. When Nana finally spoke, her voice carried a determination Maya had never heard before. "You're right," she said. "That little boy deserves justice, and his family deserves closure. It's taken me 37 years to find the courage, but I'm ready to tell the truth about what I saw that night." Maya reached across the table and took her grandmother's hand. "We'll do it together," she said. "All of us. Mom, you, and me." David Hartwell has gotten away with murder for long enough. But as they sat there planning their next steps, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that David Hartwell was still watching their family, still monitoring them for signs that they might break their decades-long silence. The investigation she had stumbled into was about to become public, and Maya suspected that the powerful man who had killed Marcus Morrison wouldn't hesitate to protect himself by any means necessary. The battle for justice was about to begin in earnest, and Maya was no longer just investigating a cold case. She was preparing to confront a killer who had spent nearly 4 decades believing he was untouchable. The phone call to Robert Chen was scheduled for Sunday afternoon, giving Maya and her family one day to prepare themselves for what they hoped would be the beginning of the end of their decades-long secret. But as Maya helped Nana organize the unsent letters and other documents they planned to share with the private investigator, she made a discovery that would shatter everything she thought she knew about her own identity. While looking through the box of letters, Maya found a manila envelope that had been tucked beneath all the other papers. The envelope was sealed and unmarked, but it felt substantial, as though it contained official documents rather than personal correspondence. When Maya asked Nana about it, her grandmother's reaction was immediate and alarming. "Don't open that," Nana said quickly, reaching for the envelope. But Maya had already begun to tear the seal, and something in her grandmother's panicked expression told her that whatever was inside was crucial to understanding their family story. The first document Maya pulled out was a birth certificate, but not one she recognized. The certificate was for a baby girl born on Maya's exact birth date, but the name on the certificate wasn't Maya Johnson. It was Maya Morrison. Maya stared at the document, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. According to the birth certificate, her parents were Robert and Linda Morrison, Marcus Morrison's parents. The address listed was the Morrison house at the end of Maple Street. "I don't understand," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This can't be right." Nana was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she reached for Maya's hands. "Oh, sweetheart, we never wanted you to find out this way. We wanted to tell you when you were older, when you could better understand why we made the choices we did." Maya felt the world tilting around her as the implications sank in. "Are you saying I'm Marcus Morrison's sister?" "Yes," Nana said through her tears. "Marcus was your older brother, Maya. You were born 3 years after him in 1985. Maya's hands were shaking as she looked at the birth certificate again, this time noticing details she had missed in her initial shock. The document was authentic, bearing official seals and signatures, and it clearly established her identity as Maya Morrison, daughter of Robert and Linda Morrison of Maple Street, Baltimore. But how? Why? Maya couldn't form complete questions, her mind reeling with the magnitude of this revelation. Sarah appeared in the doorway, having returned from her hospital shift to find her daughter and her mother in the middle of what was clearly an emotional crisis. When she saw the birth certificate in Maya's hands, her face went pale. "She found it," Sarah said quietly to Nana. "It wasn't a question." "Who am I?" Maya asked, looking between the 2 women she had always believed were her mother and grandmother. "If I'm Maya Morrison, then who are you?" Sarah sat down beside Maya and took her hands gently. "I'm your aunt," she said softly. "Your mother, Linda, is my older sister, and Nana is your grandmother, but she's also my mother and Linda's mother." Maya felt like she was drowning in revelations. "Then where are my real parents? Where are Robert and Linda Morrison?" The silence that followed her question was heavy with years of carefully guarded pain. Finally, Nana spoke. "After Marcus was taken, your parents, Linda and Robert, they fell apart," she said carefully. "The grief, the fear, the constant wondering if their son was alive or dead, it destroyed them. They couldn't function as parents anymore. They couldn't take care of you." "They gave me away?" Maya asked, the words coming out more harshly than she had intended. "They gave you to us, Sarah corrected gently. They knew we would love you and protect you and give you the stable family life they couldn't provide anymore. It wasn't that they didn't want you, Maya. It was that they wanted what was best for you, even when they couldn't be what was best for you. Maya looked around the kitchen where she had eaten thousands of meals, where she had done homework and celebrated birthdays and shared the everyday moments that make up a childhood. Everything she had believed about her life was built on a foundation of secrets and carefully constructed lies. So when you said you witnessed Marcus being taken, Maya said to Sarah, you were actually witnessing your nephew being kidnapped. My brother? Yes, Sarah whispered. And when we moved to this house afterward, we weren't just moving to keep watch over the Morrison house. We were moving into your family's home. Linda and Robert couldn't bear to live here anymore, so they signed the house over to us and left Baltimore. Maya stood up abruptly, needing space to process this information. She walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the Morrison house, her family's original house, the place where she had been born and where her brother had been stolen from. His bedroom while she slept in a crib down the hall. Does this mean David Hartwell killed my brother? She asked without turning around. Yes, Nana said simply. David Hartwell murdered your brother Marcus, and his family's political connections allowed him to cover up the crime and terrorize the witnesses into silence. Maya turned back to face them, and both Sarah and Nana were surprised by the change in her expression. The confused, hurt child who had been struggling to understand her place in the world had been replaced by someone with a steely determination that reminded them powerfully of the Morrison family's strength and resilience. Where are my birth parents now? Maya asked. Robert and Linda Morrison. They moved to Oregon after they signed custody of you over to us, Sarah said. They send cards on your birthday and at Christmas, but they've never wanted to have direct contact because they felt it would be confusing for you and painful for them. Do they know I found out the truth? No, Nana said. We haven't spoken to them about you in several years. We thought it would be easier for everyone if we maintained the separation. Maya processed this information silently for several minutes. Her entire identity had been revealed as a carefully constructed fiction. But instead of feeling lost or angry, she found herself feeling something unexpected. Clarity. For the first time in her life, Max's behavior around the Morrison house made perfect sense. He had been drawn to her family's original home, sensing something about Maya's connection to the place that she herself hadn't understood. This changes everything, Maya said finally. I'm not just investigating a cold case about a missing child. I'm investigating my own brother's murder. Maya, sweetheart, Sarah began, but Maya interrupted her. No, I understand now why you kept this from me. I understand why you were so afraid of David Hartwell and why you never came forward with what you knew. But I also understand that Marcus was my brother and he deserves justice. Maya walked to the table where the documents were spread out and began gathering them with renewed purpose. We're still calling Robert Chen tomorrow, but now I have questions for him that go beyond just solving a cold case. I want to know what evidence he has against David Hartwell, and I want to know if it's enough to finally get justice for Marcus. Maya, you need to understand that this is dangerous, Nana said urgently. David Hartwell has killed to protect his secret before. If he realizes that we're finally ready to come forward, then we'll be ready for him, Maya said, with a confidence that surprised even herself. I've spent the last week thinking I was just a curious kid who stumbled into a mystery. Now I know I'm Marcus Morrison's sister, and I'm going to make sure his killer finally pays for what he did. That night, Maya lay in bed staring at her birth certificate and trying to reconcile her new identity with the life she had always known. She was Maya Morrison, sister to a murdered boy, daughter to parents who had been so destroyed by grief that they couldn't raise her. She was also Maya Johnson, beloved daughter and granddaughter to the family who had saved her from that tragedy and given her a stable, loving home. Max lay beside her on the bed, and for the first time, Maya understood. why he had always been so protective of her and so drawn to the Morrison house. Dogs had instincts about family and territory that humans often missed, and Max had been trying to tell her something important about her own identity from the very beginning. As Maya drifted off to sleep, she made a promise to the brother she couldn't remember but would never forget. She was going to find out exactly what David Hartwell had done to him, and she was going to make sure he finally faced justice for his crime. The scared little girl who had started this investigation was gone, replaced by someone who understood that she wasn't just solving a mystery. She was fighting for her family's honor and her brother's memory. And Maya Morrison was discovering that she had inherited more than just her birth parents' name. She had inherited their strength, their determination, and their unwillingness to let injustice go unanswered. The battle with David Hartwell was about to become deeply personal in ways the killer could never have anticipated. Marcus Morrison's little sister was all grown up, and she was coming for the man who had destroyed her family. The phone call with Robert Chen was scheduled for Monday afternoon, but Maya couldn't wait that long to return to the Morrison house. Knowing now that it had been her original family home, she felt a profound need to see it through different eyes, not as an abandoned building at the end of her street, but as the place where she had been born and where her brother had lived. His short life. On Sunday morning, while Sarah and Nana were at church, Maya made what she planned to be her final solo trip to the hidden room. This time, she approached the house with a sense of ownership and purpose that had been missing from her previous visits. This was her family's home, and she had every right to be there. Max seemed to sense the change in Maya's attitude. Instead of his previous anxious behavior, he trotted beside her with what appeared to be satisfaction, as though he approved of her newfound understanding of their connection to the place. In the hidden room, Maya began a more systematic examination of the documents and evidence that had been collected over the years. Now that she understood her personal connection to the case, she could see patterns and significance that had been invisible to her before. One box she hadn't thoroughly explored contained personal items that had clearly belonged to Marcus during his lifetime. There were school photos showing a boy with Maya's same dark eyes and stubborn chin, report cards documenting a child who was bright and curious, and drawings that revealed an 8-year-old's typical fascination with superheroes and baseball. But buried at the bottom of the box, Maya found something that changed everything, a small journal with a lock that had been broken long ago. The cover was decorated with Baltimore Orioles stickers, and Marcus Morrison, Private, was written across the front in a child's careful handwriting. Maya opened the journal with trembling hands and began to read her brother's thoughts from the weeks leading up to his disappearance. What she found was both heartbreaking and terrifying. The early entries were typical childhood observations: complaints about homework, excitement about Little League games, and detailed descriptions of the neighborhood cats that Marcus had been trying to befriend. But as Maya read further, the tone of the entries began to change. July 15th, 1987. There's a man in a black car who keeps driving by our house. He drove by 3 times today, and I saw him looking at our house each time. Mum says I'm imagining things, but I'm not. July 22nd, 1987. The black car man was parked across the street this morning when I left for baseball practice. When I waved at him, he drove away real fast. I think he's watching me. August 3rd, 1987. I told Dad about the black car man, and he said he would look into it. But when he talked to the police, they said they hadn't seen anything suspicious in our neighborhood. I know what I saw, though. August 15th, 1987. The black car man talked to me today. He was parked near the playground when I was walking home from Jimmy's house. He called me over and asked if I was Marcus Morrison. When I said yes, he asked if I had been talking to people about seeing his car. I got scared and ran home. Maya's heart was pounding as she read these entries. Marcus had been aware that David Hartwell was watching him, and he had tried to warn the adults in his life, but no one had taken his concerns seriously enough to protect him. The entries continued. documenting Marcus's growing fear and his futile attempts to get adult help. August 28th, 1987. The black car man knows where I go to school. He was parked outside when we got out today. I told Mrs. Henderson, and she said she would call my parents. But I don't think she believed me. September 3rd, 1987. I followed the black car man today to see where he lives. He drove to the big White House on Franklin Avenue, where the city councilman lives. I think he might work for the government. That's probably why the police won't do anything about him. September 10th, 1987. The black car man told me that bad things happen to little boys who tell stories about people they don't understand. He said I should stop talking to adults about seeing him, or something bad might happen to my family. I'm really scared now, but I don't know who to tell. Maya had to stop reading for several minutes, overwhelmed by the realization that her 8-year-old brother had spent his final weeks living in terror, trying to protect his family from a threat that no adult would take seriously. When she was able to continue, she found that the final entries painted an even more disturbing picture. September 12th, 1987. I think the black car man is going to try to hurt me. I heard him talking to someone on a phone today when he was parked outside our house. He said the kid is becoming a problem, and it needs to be handled soon. I don't know what to do. September 14th, 1987. This might be my last time writing in this journal. The black car man has been parked outside our house all day, and I can see him watching my bedroom window. I tried to tell Mom and Dad again, but they think I'm having nightmares because of all the scary movies Jimmy's brother showed us. I hid this journal under my mattress in case something happens to me. If someone finds this, the black car man's name is David Hartwell, and he lives in the White House on Franklin Avenue. He drives a black car with license plates that start with DH. He killed me because I saw him doing bad things, and I was going to tell. Maya closed the journal and sat in the dim light of the hidden room, tears streaming down her face as she fully understood what her brother had endured in his final days. Marcus had been intelligent enough to document the threat against him and even to identify his killer, but he had been too young to effectively protect himself against an adult predator with political connections. But Marcus had also been brave, enough to leave evidence behind, and his final act had been to ensure that someday someone would know the truth about what had happened to him. Maya photographed every page of the journal, understanding that this was the evidence Robert Chen would need to finally build an airtight case against David Hartwell. Marcus's own words, written in his childish handwriting just hours before his death, would be powerful testimony that no legal defense could discredit. When Maya returned home that afternoon, she found Sarah and Nana waiting for her in the kitchen, with expressions of concern and determination that matched her own. "We know where you went," Sarah said without preamble, "and we know you found something important because you have that look you get when you figured something out." Maya set Marcus's journal on the table between them. "I found his diary," she said simply. "Marcus documented everything that happened to him in the weeks before David Hartwell killed him. He knew he was in danger and he tried to get help, but nobody listened." Both women stared at the journal as though it were a sacred artifact, which in many ways it was. This was Marcus's voice, preserved across nearly 4 decades, finally ready to testify against the man who had silenced him. "What does it say?" Nana asked quietly. Maya opened the journal to the final entry and read it aloud, her voice steady, despite the tears that continued to flow down her cheeks. When she finished, the kitchen was silent, except for the sound of 3 women crying for a little boy who had died trying to protect his family. "We have to call Robert Chen now," Sarah said finally. "Tonight. This can't wait until tomorrow." Maya pulled out her phone and dialed the number she had found in the hidden room documents. When a gruff voice answered with a simple "Chen," Maya took a deep breath and began what would prove to be the most important conversation of her life. "Mr. Chen, this is Maya Johnson, Maya Morrison. I'm Marcus Morrison's sister, and I think it's time to finish what you started. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and when Robert Chen spoke again, his voice carried a weight of emotion that spoke to decades of waiting for this moment. "Maya Morrison," he said slowly, "I've been wondering when you would be ready to learn the truth about your brother. Are you prepared for what that's going to mean?" "I found his journal," Maya said. "Marcus documented everything David Hartwell did to him before the murder. I have his diary, I have witness testimony from my mother and grandmother, and I have 37 years of evidence that someone has been collecting. I think it's time to get justice for Marcus. I'll be there in an hour," Chen said. "And Maya? Your brother would be proud of the woman you've become." As they waited for Robert Chen to arrive, Maya sat with Sarah and Nana, planning what would happen next. They would turn over all the evidence they had collected, including Marcus's journal and Nana's unsent letters documenting her witness observations. Sarah would give an official statement about what she had seen the night Marcus was taken, and Maya would formally reclaim her identity as Maya Morrison, the sister of a murdered boy who deserved justice. But they would also need to prepare for David Hartwell's response, once he learned that his decades-old secret was finally being exposed. The man who had killed to protect his reputation once before wouldn't hesitate to do so again, and Maya's family would need protection once they became public witnesses against him. "Are you ready for this?" Nana asked Maya as they heard a car pulling into their driveway. "Once we start down this path, there's no going back to the way things were." Maya looked out the window at the Morrison house, her family's house, where her brother had lived and died, and where she had been born into a family that David Hartwell had destroyed. Max sat beside her, alert and protective, as though he understood that they were about to embark on the most dangerous part of their journey. "Marcus waited 37 years for justice," Maya said quietly. "I'm not going to make him wait any longer." The investigation that had begun with a curious girl following her dog's strange behavior was about to become a public fight for justice that would either finally bring peace to the Morrison family or destroy the lives of everyone brave enough to stand up to a killer who had thought he was untouchable. Robert Chen's footsteps on the front porch marked the beginning of the end of David Hartwell's carefully constructed life, and the beginning of Maya Morrison's transformation from protected child to avenging sister. Robert Chen arrived carrying a worn leather briefcase that looked like it had accompanied him through decades of difficult cases. He was a small, compact man in his 70s, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and the careful movements of someone who had spent years being cautious about his personal safety. When Maya opened the door, his first words weren't a greeting but an assessment. "You look like him," he said simply. "Same eyes, same stubborn chin." Marcus had that same expression when he was determined about something. Maya felt her breath catch as she realized she was meeting someone who had actually known her brother, who had memories of Marcus as a living, breathing child, rather than just a victim in a cold case file. Chen settled at the kitchen table and opened his briefcase, revealing organizational systems that spoke to decades of meticulous investigation. "I've been working Marcus's case since 1987, he said without preamble, initially as a police consultant, then as a private investigator when it became clear that official channels were compromised. I've been waiting 37 years for someone from your family to be ready to help me finish what we started." "What do you need from us?" Sarah asked. "Everything," Chen replied. "Official statements from both of you about what you witnessed. Access to any documents or evidence you've collected. And Maya, I need you to be prepared to testify publicly about what you've discovered, because David Hartwell isn't going to go quietly." Maya nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. "I'm ready. What's our plan?" Chen spread several folders across the table, revealing photographs, documents, and evidence that represented nearly 4 decades of investigation. "Next week is the monthly Baltimore City Council meeting, where David Hartwell will be presiding as council president. The meeting includes a public comment period where any citizen can address the council about city business. That's where we're going to present our case. In front of everyone? Nana asked, her voice reflecting decades of fear about speaking publicly. In front of everyone, Chen confirmed. With media present, with official records being kept, and with Hartwell unable to suppress or discredit what we're saying. It's the safest way to ensure our evidence gets heard. As Chen outlined his strategy, Maya found herself studying the photographs in his files. Most showed David Hartwell at various stages of his life and career, but there were also crime scene photos from the Morrison house and images of evidence that had been collected during the original investigation. But it was the final folder that contained Chen's most powerful evidence. Inside was an old cassette tape player and a tape labeled simply Marcus, September 14th, 1987. "What's that?" Maya asked, pointing to the tape. Chen's expression grew solemn. The night Marcus was taken, he managed to turn on a tape recorder he kept beside his bed. It was one of those voice-activated models that kids used to use for recording themselves, singing or telling stories. The police found it the next morning, but they claimed it was blank and returned it to your parents. Maya felt her pulse quicken. But it wasn't blank. No. Your birth parents gave it to me before they left Baltimore, hoping I might be able to find something the police had missed. It took me 3 months and some very specialized equipment, but I was able to recover the recording. Chen placed the tape player in the center of the table and looked directly at Maya. "This is going to be hard to hear. It's your brother's voice from the night he died, and it captures his final minutes in his bedroom. Are you sure you're ready?" Maya looked at Sarah and Nana, both of whom were crying before the tape even started playing. She thought about the 8-year-old boy who had tried so hard to protect his family, who had documented his fear and tried to warn the adults around him, and who had died knowing that no one had listened. "Play it," Maya said quietly. Chen pressed the play button, and after a moment of static, a young boy's voice filled the kitchen. Maya's brother Marcus, speaking across 37 years of silence. "I can hear someone downstairs. I think it's the black car man. I'm scared, but I'm going to hide this tape so someone will know what happened to me if..." There was a long pause. Then the sound of footsteps on stairs, getting closer to Marcus's room. "He's coming upstairs. His name is David Hartwell, and he drives a black car, and he works for the city government. He told me bad things happened to kids who tell stories about him. I think he's going to hurt me because I saw him." The bedroom door could be heard opening, and then David Hartwell's voice, cold and threatening. "Hello, Marcus. I told you what would happen if you kept talking about me." Marcus's voice, smaller. "Now terrified, please don't hurt me. I won't tell anyone, I promise." "I know you won't tell anyone," Hartwell replied, "because dead boys don't talk." The tape continued for another minute, capturing sounds that Maya realized were her brother being taken from his room. His voice calling for his parents, Hartwell's threats to harm the family if Marcus made noise, and finally silence. When the tape ended, the kitchen was filled with a quiet that felt sacred and terrible. Maya was crying, but she was also filled with a rage so pure and focused that it surprised her. David Hartwell's own voice was on that tape, threatening and ultimately murdering her brother. There could be no defense against evidence like this. "Why? Didn't the police arrest him immediately when you recovered this recording?" Sarah asked through her tears. "I tried," Chen said grimly. "I took it to Detective Wilson, who took it to his superiors, who told him that the tape was inadmissible because it had been obtained through unauthorized means. Then I started getting death threats, and Wilson was forced into early retirement. That's when I knew David Hartwell's protection reached high into the department." Maya wiped her tears and looked at the cassette player with new understanding. This wasn't just evidence. It was Marcus's final testimony, his last chance to identify his killer and seek justice. "At the city council meeting," Maya said, "I want to play this tape during my testimony. I want everyone to hear David Hartwell confessing to my brother's murder in his own voice." Chen nodded approvingly. That's exactly what we're going to do. And Maya, when you stand up at that podium and tell Baltimore who you really are and what David Hartwell did to your family, you're going to be completing the promise your brother made in his journal. You're going to be his voice, finally speaking loud enough for everyone to hear. Maya looked at her family. Sarah, who had witnessed her nephew's abduction, Nana, who had seen the killer's car, and Robert Chen, who had spent his career seeking justice for a little boy who had died trying to protect the people he loved. When is the next council meeting? Maya asked. Thursday night, Chen replied. 3 days from now. Maya nodded, feeling the certainty that comes with finally understanding your purpose in life. She was Maya Morrison, sister to a murdered boy, and she was going to make sure that David Hartwell finally faced consequences for the crime he had committed nearly 4 decades ago. The scared, curious girl who had started this investigation was gone, replaced by someone who understood that justice delayed wasn't justice denied. It was justice waiting for the right person to demand it loudly enough that it couldn't be ignored. The Baltimore City Council chambers were fuller than usual on Thursday night, word having somehow spread that something significant was going to happen during the public comment period. Maya sat in the front row between Sarah and Nana, with Robert Chen positioned nearby, all of them hyper-aware of David Hartwell's presence at the council president's seat just 20 feet away. Maya had seen photographs of David Hartwell throughout Chen's files, but seeing him in person was different. He was a distinguished-looking man in his 60s, with silver hair and the confident bearing of someone who had spent decades in positions of power. As Maya watched him conduct the routine business of the council meeting, she found it almost impossible to reconcile this respectable civic leader with the voice she had heard on Marcus's tape, coldly threatening to murder an 8-year-old child. When the public comment period was called, Maya stood and walked to the podium with steady steps, carrying the folder that contained her brother's diary, the original police reports that Chen had obtained, and the cassette player with Marcus's final recording. "My name is Maya Morrison," she began, her voice clear and strong, despite the magnitude of what she was about to reveal. 11 years ago, I was adopted by the Johnson family and given a new name to protect me from the man who murdered my 8-year-old brother in 1987. A murmur went through the council chambers, and Maya could see David Hartwell's expression, changing from polite attention to alarm as he realized what was happening. "My brother Marcus Morrison disappeared from his bedroom on September 14, 1987, Maya continued. "For 37 years, his killer has lived freely in this city, building a career and a reputation, while my family has lived in fear and silence. Tonight, I'm here to name my brother's murderer and to demand that justice finally be served." Maya opened the folder and pulled out Marcus's journal. "In the weeks before his death, my brother documented being stalked and threatened by a man in a black car. He identified this man by name, and he recorded his license plate number. That man was David Hartwell, who now sits as president of this city council." David Hartwell stood abruptly from his seat. "This is outrageous," he said, his voice carrying the authority of his position, but also an edge of panic. "I will not sit here and listen to wild accusations from a disturbed child." "I'm not finished," Maya said firmly, and something in her voice made Hartwell sit back down. "My brother was not the only witness to David Hartwell's crimes. My mother, Sarah Johnson, who was then Sarah Morrison, saw David Hartwell carrying Marcus from our house to his car on the night of September 14th. My grandmother, Dorothy Johnson, saw David Hartwell's car parked outside our house multiple times in the weeks before the murder." Maya could see reporters in the audience taking notes frantically, and she noticed that several police officers had quietly positioned themselves near the exits. Chen had clearly prepared for this moment thoroughly. "But the most damning evidence," Maya continued, "comes from my brother himself." She placed the cassette player on the podium and looked directly at David Hartwell. On the night he was murdered, Marcus managed to record his final minutes, including his conversation with his killer. Maya pressed play, and Marcus's voice filled the council chambers with the same impact it had had in her kitchen 3 days earlier. The room was completely silent as the tape played, documenting not just Marcus's murder, but David Hartwell's confession in his own voice. When the tape ended, the silence in the council chambers was deafening. David Hartwell sat frozen in his chair, his face pale and his hands gripping the arms of his seat. Several council members were staring at him in horror, and Maya could hear people in the audience beginning to react with outrage and demands for immediate action. "That tape is a fake," Hartwell said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. "This is a coordinated attack designed to destroy my reputation and my career. I demand that these accusations be investigated properly before—" Robert Chen stood from his seat in the audience. "Mr. Hartwell, I'm Robert Chen, private investigator, and I've been investigating your crime for 37 years. I have the original, unaltered police report from Marcus Morrison's disappearance, which documents evidence that was deliberately suppressed to protect you." Chen approached the podium carrying a thick folder. "I have witness statements that were never followed up on, physical evidence that was lost or destroyed, and documentation of the threats that were made against the Morrison family to keep them silent. I also have records of the political pressure that was applied to end the investigation prematurely." As Chen began presenting his evidence, Maya watched David Hartwell's composure crumble in real time. The confident politician was being replaced by a desperate man who could see his carefully constructed life falling apart in front of an audience of constituents, media, and city officials. "This is all fabricated," Hartwell said, but he was no longer addressing the council or the audience. He seemed to be talking to himself, as though he couldn't quite believe that his decades-old secret was finally being exposed. No one was supposed to remember. The family left town, the witnesses were silenced, the evidence was destroyed. Maya realized that David Hartwell was essentially confessing, admitting to actions that only the killer would have known about. The other council members were looking at him with expressions of shock and disgust, and she could see that several had already reached for their phones to call for police assistance. "David Hartwell," Maya said, her voice carrying across the chambers with absolute authority. "You murdered my brother Marcus Morrison on September 14th, 1987. You terrorized my family into silence for nearly 40 years. But Marcus left evidence and witnesses and a voice that has finally found its way back to the truth." At that moment, Baltimore police officers entered the council chambers from multiple entrances. The lead detective approached David Hartwell, who was now slumped in his chair, looking every one of his 68 years. "David Hartwell," the detective said formally, "you're under arrest for the murder of Marcus Morrison. You have the right to remain silent." As the handcuffs were placed on David Hartwell's wrists, Maya felt a sense of completion that she hadn't expected. This wasn't just justice for Marcus, it was liberation for her entire family from decades of fear and secrets. The council chambers erupted in conversation as David Hartwell was led away, but Maya remained at the podium, looking out at the audience that had just witnessed the end of one of Baltimore's longest-standing cover-ups. "My brother Marcus Morrison was 8 years old when he was murdered," Maya said into the microphone, her voice carrying over the noise. "He spent his final weeks trying to protect his family from a monster, and he died believing that no one would listen to him. Tonight, 37 years later, Baltimore finally heard his voice." Maya stepped down from the podium and walked back to her family, who embraced her with tears of relief and pride. The investigation that had begun with a dog's strange behavior had ended with a killer's arrest, and Maya Morrison had finally given her brother the voice he had been waiting decades to have heard. 6 months after David Hartwell's arrest, Maya stood in the backyard of what everyone now called the Morrison-Johnson house, watching construction workers put the finishing touches on the Marcus Morrison Memorial Garden. The abandoned house at the end of Maple Street had been transformed into a community center focused on child safety and missing persons advocacy, with the hidden basement room preserved as a reminder of the importance of never giving up on justice. The trial had lasted 3 months, with Maya's testimony serving as the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. Marcus's tape recording had been ruled admissible after extensive forensic analysis confirmed its authenticity, and David Hartwell's own words had ultimately convicted him. He was now serving life without parole at the Maryland Correctional Institution, his political career and reputation destroyed by the truth he had spent 4 decades trying to hide. Maya had struggled with the adjustment to her new public identity as Maya Morrison, but she had also discovered a sense of completeness that she hadn't known she was missing. The Johnson family remained her real family. Sarah was still the mother who had raised her, and Nana was still the grandmother who had protected her. But now Maya also carried the legacy of her birth parents and her murdered brother, Robert. And Linda Morrison had returned to Baltimore for the trial, and Maya had finally met the parents she couldn't remember. The reunion had been emotional and complex, filled with grief for the years they had lost and gratitude for the family that had kept Maya safe. They had decided together that Maya would continue living with Sarah and Nana while building a relationship with her birth parents, creating an extended family structure that honored both her past and her present. "Maya, come look at this," Sarah called from the front porch, where she was arranging flowers around a memorial plaque that would be dedicated. Later that afternoon, Maya walked through the house that now felt like home in ways it never had when she was simply Maya Johnson, curious about the abandoned building at the end of her street. The plaque was simple but powerful. In memory of Marcus Morrison, 1979-1987. His voice lives on in those who refuse to let injustice hide in silence. Below the inscription was a photograph of Marcus that Maya had found among the evidence in the hidden room, showing him grinning at the camera with a baseball glove in his hand and dirt on his face from a game he had just finished playing. "It's perfect," Maya said, running her fingers over her brother's name carved in bronze. He would have loved knowing that his story helped other kids. The Marcus Morrison Memorial Garden had become more than just a tribute to Maya's brother. In the months since David Hartwell's conviction, the story had inspired other families to come forward with information about unsolved missing children cases. And Robert Chen had been hired by the city to review cold cases that might have been improperly investigated due to political pressure or corruption. Maya herself had become something of a reluctant celebrity, featured in newspaper articles and television interviews about the importance of never giving up on cold cases. She had used her platform to advocate for missing children and their families, working with national organizations to improve investigation protocols and support systems. But perhaps most importantly, Maya had helped other young people find their voices when facing injustice. She received letters from children around the country who had been inspired by her courage to speak up about problems in their own communities, from school bullying to more serious crimes that adults had dismissed or ignored. Mrs. Patterson had become the unofficial historian of the street's transformation, documenting the changes in the neighborhood as the Morrison house evolved from a symbol of tragedy to a beacon of hope. She still sat on her front porch every afternoon with her coffee and binoculars, but now she was watching for families coming to visit the memorial garden rather than monitoring for potential threats. Max had adjusted to the changes better than anyone had expected. The golden retriever seemed to understand that his long vigil over the Morrison house was complete, and he had returned to the normal behavior of a family pet who was loved and secure. Maya sometimes caught him sitting in the memorial garden, as though he was keeping Marcus company, but the anxious obsession that had started this entire investigation was gone. On the day of the memorial dedication, Maya stood before a crowd of neighborhood residents, city officials, and families of other missing children preparing to speak about her brother's legacy. She had written and rewritten her speech dozens of times, trying to find words that would honor Marcus while also inspiring others to never accept that injustice is inevitable. My brother Marcus Morrison died believing that no one would listen to him. Maya began, looking out at faces that included several she recognized from the city council meeting where David Hartwell had been arrested. But his voice traveled across 37 years to find me, and through me it reached all of you. That's the power of refusing to let truth stay buried. Maya talked about the importance of listening to children when they report being afraid, about investigating thoroughly even when it's politically inconvenient, and about the strength that comes from families who support each other through decades of difficulty and uncertainty. But as she concluded her speech, Maya's words became deeply personal. I learned this year that identity isn't just about the name you're given or the family you're born into. It's about the choices you make and the legacy you decide to carry forward. I am Maya Morrison, proud sister of a boy who died trying to protect his family. I'm also Maya Johnson, grateful daughter of the family that saved me and gave me the strength to seek justice for my brother. Maya looked up at Sarah and Nana, who were standing with Robert and Linda Morrison in the front row, all four of them, crying as they watched her speak. Some families are created by blood, and others are created by love and choice. I'm lucky enough to have both kinds, and together we've proven that truth has a power that time can't diminish. As the ceremony concluded and people began to tour the memorial garden, Maya found herself standing beside Marcus's memorial plaque with a sense of peace she hadn't expected to feel. Max sat beside her, alert but calm, as though he too understood that their work was complete. Maya had started this journey as a curious child, trying to understand her dog's strange behavior. She was ending it as a young woman who understood her purpose, to be the voice for those who couldn't speak for themselves, to seek truth even when it was dangerous, and to never accept that powerful people are above justice. The abandoned house at the end of Maple Street had given up its secrets, but more importantly, it had revealed to Maya Morrison who she was meant to become. In seeking justice for her brother, she had found herself, and in finding herself, she had discovered a mission that would guide the rest of her life. The investigation was over, but Maya's work as an advocate for truth and justice was just beginning.